If you're about to buy a used 2011 to 2016 Duramax, there's one number worth knowing before you sign anything: 0. That's what a used truck buyer gets today from the class action General Motors lost over this truck's CP4 fuel pump, because the deadline to file a claim already passed. The lawsuit was real, the settlement was real, and none of it reaches you. What still reaches you is the pump itself, which has a well-documented habit of destroying its own fuel system from the inside and contaminating the injectors with metal. Here's exactly why it fails, what General Motors' own settlement site now says about it, and what it means for the truck you're looking at today. Start with the truck itself, because this isn't a problem that follows every Duramax ever built. It's specific to one window, 2011 through 2016, the LML generation, built for the Silverado and Sierra 2500 and 3500 HD. If you're cross-shopping an older LB7 or LLY, or a newer L5P from 2017 on, this particular issue doesn't apply to you at all. GM switched pumps after 2016, and once you hear why, you'll understand this wasn't a minor running change. It was GM quietly admitting the earlier design had a real weakness. During that 6-year window, every one of these trucks left the factory with a Bosch CP4 high-pressure fuel pump. It's a small, dense unit, about the size of a fist, sitting right at the heart of the fuel system. Its job is to take fuel from the tank and pressurize it hard enough to fire through a diesel injector. And on paper, it's a good piece of engineering. Bosch builds it. Multiple manufacturers, not just GM, put versions of it into diesel trucks during this same era, which is part of why this failure mode became so well documented across the whole diesel repair industry, not just one brand's forums. The problem isn't the pump's design in isolation, it's what it was designed to run on. European diesel fuel carries more built-in lubrication than the diesel sold at your average American truck stop, and this pump was never fully adapted for that difference. Ask anyone who's actually pulled one of these apart for a living, and they'll tell you the internal components wear against each other with almost no cushion once that lubrication gap shows up. On a used Duramax with real miles already on the odometer, that's not a hypothetical risk sitting somewhere in a spec sheet. That's an active countdown, running right now, in whatever truck you're looking at. That countdown looks like this once it actually starts. As the internal components of the CP4 wear down, they shed metal. Not a little dust that gets filtered out and forgotten. Actual metal shavings, small enough to travel through the fuel lines, but hard enough to do real damage everywhere they go. And because this pump sits at the pressurized center of the entire fuel system, those shavings don't stay contained anywhere near their source. They travel downstream, into the fuel rail, into the injectors themselves, and in the worst cases, all the way back into the tank. Owners describe the first symptom the same way almost every single time: a hard start or no start at all. The engine cranks and just won't catch, usually first thing in the morning when the truck's been sitting. If a shop scans it at that point, they'll usually find code P0087, low fuel rail pressure. That code alone can point to a dozen small, unrelated things on a different engine. On an LML Duramax with real mileage, it's often the very specific tell that the CP4 has already begun failing internally. And this is where the real damage happens, because by the time that code shows up, the metal is frequently already downstream. You're not just replacing a pump anymore at that point. You may be replacing injectors that cost real money each, cleaning or replacing fuel rails that got scored by contamination, and in the worst cases, dropping the tank entirely to clear out debris that's been circulating for weeks before anyone noticed. One owner online put it about as plainly as it can be put: a failure of this pump would cost more than the truck is worth to a lot of buyers. Another called it a ticking time bomb of expense, sitting quietly under the hood of a truck that otherwise runs and drives perfectly fine. That's not the only version of this owner's report either. Some describe it differently. The truck runs completely fine at idle in the driveway, then loses power or stumbles under load once you're actually pulling a trailer or climbing a grade, which is exactly the kind of moment a retiree towing a camper or a boat can least afford to have it happen. A few describe a rough, uneven idle that shows up out of nowhere after months of the truck running perfectly. The common thread across every version is the same. No gradual warning, no slow decline you can budget around, just an otherwise healthy truck that suddenly isn't. That phrase gets used constantly in Duramax owner forums, and it's not exaggeration for the sake of drama. It's describing a part that can fail with essentially zero warning on a truck that looks and drives like a totally sound purchase for thousands of dollars on a schedule that nobody, not even a good mechanic, can reliably predict in advance. This is exactly the kind of thing this channel exists to dig up. The part of a used truck story, a seller's ad, or a dealer's sales pitch is never going to volunteer on its own. There's a genuinely interesting legal twist to this pump story coming up next, and if digging up that kind of buried detail is useful to you as a shopper, subscribing costs nothing and just means you don't miss the next one. Most sellers have never even heard the part that comes next, and it's actually the most interesting part of this whole story, because GM didn't just get away with this quietly and move on. Owners filed suit. The case is Chapman versus General Motors, filed in federal court in the Eastern District of Michigan. And it wasn't some fringe complaint that went nowhere and got dismissed. It moved through the courts for years, and it ended in a real, court-approved class action settlement, administered through a dedicated site called gmfuelpumplitigation.com. GM didn't have to formally admit fault as part of that process, the way these settlements usually work, but a company doesn't fund a nationwide claims program with a real administrator and a real payout schedule for a part that never actually had a problem. For a specific group of owners in 7 states who bought their truck from a dealer sometime from 2010 to 2024, this was real money on the table. If you bought one of these trucks from a dealer in California, Florida, Illinois, Iowa, New York, Pennsylvania, or Texas, and you were still dealing with this pump, there was an actual, workable path to get paid back for what you went through. You'll see the total value of that settlement reported differently depending on where you look online. Anywhere from the mid-$30 million range up to around $50 million, and even that detail is not fully agreed on across the coverage, which tells you something about how murky the public reporting on this actually got. But the core fact underneath all of it is not in dispute. This was real. It was court-supervised from start to finish, and for the right owner, filing in time, it genuinely worked. That's genuinely satisfying to hear if you've ever owned one of these trucks and felt like nobody in Detroit was listening. General Motors got taken to court over a part they put into hundreds of thousands of vehicles, and they paid out. If you're the kind of buyer who likes seeing a manufacturer actually held to account for something, instead of just quietly patching it in a service bulletin nobody reads, that part of the story should land well. Because there's a catch coming, a real one, and this is exactly where the story turns. Every single deadline in that settlement has already passed. Go to the settlement's own website today, right now, and you'll find a status table, and every row on that table is marked the same way, closed. The window to file a past repair claim closed back in November of last year. The window for former owners to file closed on that same date. Even the newer program, reimbursement for future repairs, stopped taking new filers back in July of this year, just weeks before this was researched. There's a small catch-up round, technically still running, but read the fine print carefully. It's only for people who already filed and need to fix a paperwork deficiency. It is not open to brand new claimants. It is definitely not open to you if you're buying one of these trucks used today for the first time. Sit with what that actually means for a second. The defect is real. General Motors acknowledged it enough to fund a full settlement over it. The pump sitting in the truck you're looking at right now has the exact same design flaw that paid out other owners years ago, and you get access to none of it. If that pump fails the week after you buy this truck, there is no fund left to call, no claim to file, no path back to General Motors at all, ever. The company that built the defective part settled with the people who owned it new, and quietly let the clock run out before the used market ever got a real chance to benefit from any of it. That's the part that should genuinely bother you, and it's worth asking out loud, because plenty of owners already are. Should a settlement like this ever be allowed to close, while the exact same defective part is still out there, still failing, in trucks that just keep changing hands from one buyer to the next? A common line you'll see repeated across owner forums is that this should have been a recall in the first place, not a settlement with an expiration date. General Motors would say the case is closed, legally and financially, full stop. A lot of owners would say the defect didn't expire just because the paperwork did. I'd genuinely like to know where you land on that, so put it in the comments below. Does it seem fair that the claim window closes while the pump itself is still failing on the road? Or does General Motors get a clean pass the moment the settlement's official term runs out? I read these, and this is exactly the kind of question worth arguing about with someone else in the comments. Because underneath that argument, here's the practical reality that doesn't wait for anyone's opinion. Whatever this pump does to your truck, on your ownership, on your dime, that's entirely between you and your mechanic from here forward. Not you and GM, not anymore, and not ever again for this particular truck. So what does entirely on your dime actually mean once you translate it into real dollars? This is where you want hard numbers, not vague warnings about a scary part. Multiple diesel repair shops that specialize in this exact platform put a full CP4 failure, the kind where metal has already spread into the injectors and fuel rail, at commonly $4,000 to $10,000 total. If the damage cascades further than that, some shops report jobs pushing past $10,000, up toward $12,000, particularly when injectors need full replacement rather than a cleaning and reuse. These figures are commonly reported ranges pulled from named repair shops that see this failure regularly, not a single verified invoice from one job. So treat them as a real, honest ballpark rather than gospel carved in stone. Break that down, and it's not hard to see exactly where the money goes. A remanufactured CP4 pump on its own typically runs around $700. Labor to access it, because it sits low in the engine bay behind the intake manifold, commonly runs 6 to 8 hours at a typical diesel shop's labor rate, so figure another several hundred to well over $1,000 in labor alone. Add in fuel-contaminated injectors, and each one adds up fast, sometimes multiple injectors at once, if the contamination spread evenly. That's how one small internal part failing quietly turns into a full 5-figure repair bill sitting on your invoice. There's one piece a lot of other channels skip over entirely. There is a preventive option, and it's worth knowing about even if you're not buying today. Shops that specialize in this exact platform sell CP4-to-CP3 conversion kits, which physically replace the failure-prone pump with an older, far more tolerant design before it ever gets the chance to fail on you. A typical kit runs around $2,200, parts included, installed by someone who's done a few of these before. That's real money too, no question. But it's a fraction of the worst-case repair bill, and it's something concrete you can point to on a truck you're already seriously considering. Has the seller actually done this conversion, or is the original factory CP4 still sitting in there, quietly waiting? It's also worth knowing that this isn't a job most owners attempt in their own driveway. The CP4 sits low and buried behind the intake, which is exactly why shops quote 6 to 8 hours of labor just to reach it, before any actual repair work starts. That's most of a full working day on a lift, and it's part of why the labor line on these invoices runs as high as it does even before parts are counted. If a seller tells you a shop quoted them a same-day fix on this specific job, that's worth double-checking rather than taking at face value. That single question, asked out loud during a test drive, tells you more about a seller's honesty on this specific truck than almost anything else on the lot. So here's exactly how you use all of this the next time you're standing in front of one of these trucks with a checkbook in hand. First, confirm the model year before anything else. before you even open the hood. 2011 through 2016 only for this specific issue. If it's a 2017 or newer L5P, GM had already moved to a different pump entirely, a Denso design, specifically to get away from this exact failure mode for good. That single year printed on the window sticker changes this entire conversation. Second, ask directly and plainly, has the CP4 ever been replaced or converted over to a CP3 setup? A seller who's already done that work and kept the receipts just handed you a truck with real, documented peace of mind, and that's genuinely worth something in the final price you're willing to pay. A seller who looks confused by the question, or says they've never even heard of it, just told you, without meaning to, that this truck is still running on the original, aging pump, no matter what the odometer happens to say. Third, if it hasn't been touched at all, ask for a scan of any stored diagnostic codes, specifically P0087, and ask when the fuel filter was last actually changed. These trucks want that filter changed roughly every 20,000 miles or so, and a seller who can't answer that question with any confidence probably hasn't been maintaining the fuel system closely at all. CP4 risk aside from everything else. Fourth, and this is the real leverage point most buyers never think to use, bring up the cost of a CP4-to-CP3 conversion directly during your offer, right at the negotiating table. You're not asking the seller to pay for a repair that hasn't happened yet. You're pointing out, calmly and without drama, that you're the one now carrying a known, well-documented risk that GM itself already settled an entire lawsuit over, and that risk carries a real, specific dollar figure attached to it. That's not an insult to the truck or the seller. That's just math, plain and simple, and any seller who's actually done their own homework on this platform will respect that you've clearly done yours too. Fifth, take the truck on a real test drive before you decide anything, not just a slow loop around the block. Get it up to highway speed, and if you can, put it under some actual load, even just a hard uphill pull. You're listening for exactly the symptoms already described here. Any hesitation, stumble, or power loss that wasn't there at idle in the driveway. A truck that feels perfectly smooth under real load conditions is telling you something just as useful as a clean scan tool reading. None of this means walk away from a used LML Duramax on principle. These are genuinely strong, capable trucks underneath all of this, and plenty of owners run them well past 200,000 miles without ever once seeing this specific failure. It means walking in knowing exactly what GM already quietly admitted, exactly when that admission stopped mattering to you personally as a buyer, and exactly what number to have ready the moment the conversation turns to price. If this saved you from finding any of that out the hard, expensive way, that's the entire point of this channel existing. Share it with anyone you know who's actively shopping for one of these trucks right now, because the sellers on that lot already know this whole story inside and out. It's well past time buyers knew it too.